I need every single person watching this video to stop what you're doing right now and pay complete attention, because what I'm about to show you and break down is the most insane, most chaotic, most absolutely unhinged backstage brawl that WWE has ever allowed to happen on their programming. And the fact that this went down on live television during Smackdown tells you everything you need to know about how desperate WWE is becoming to compete with the violence and unpredictability that audiences are craving. Last night, Bron Breakker and Bronson, two of the most physically imposing and legitimately dangerous performers on the roster, decided they had enough of being disrespected by the so-called legends of WWE, and they took matters into their own hands by ambushing Brock Lesnar and Drew McIntyre in the backstage area and starting an all-out war that destroyed equipment, injured multiple people, required security and local police to intervene, and has created a situation so volatile that WWE executives are allegedly considering whether they made a massive mistake by allowing these four men to work for the same company. This wasn't a worked shoot. This wasn't a carefully choreographed segment where everyone hits their marks and nobody really gets hurt. This was for legitimate fighters with real athletic backgrounds and real combat skills engaging in what can only be described as a street fight that happened to take place in an arena. And the carnage that resulted has left the entire wrestling world asking whether WWE has finally gone too far in their pursuit of realistic, edgy content, or whether this is exactly the kind of must-see television that fans have been begging for. So smash that like button right now, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, and drop a comment immediately telling me if you think what happened last night was the greatest thing WWE has done in years, or if it was a reckless disaster that should never have been allowed to happen. Because by the end of this video, you're going to have very strong opinions about what went down and what it means for the future of WWE. Before I break down every single detail of this backstage war and show you the footage that people can't stop talking about, we need to understand the context that led to four of the most dangerous men in professional wrestling deciding to settle their differences in the most violent way possible. This all started several weeks ago when Bron Breakker, who has been absolutely dominant since being called up to the main roster from NXT, cut a promo about how he's tired of hearing about the old generation and how they built WWE, and how today's wrestlers should be grateful for the foundation that was laid. Bron made it very clear that he doesn't care about respecting his elders or paying homage to the past, because in his view, the past is irrelevant and all that matters is who's the best, right now, in this moment. And according to Bron Breakker, he's the best, not Brock Lesnar, not Drew McIntyre, not Roman Reigns or Seth Rollins or anyone else who gets treated like a top guy. Him, Bron Breakker, a second-generation superstar, whose father and uncle were legends, but who wants to forge his own path and create his own legacy without living in anyone's shadow. Bronson, who has his own issues with how WWE treats younger talent versus established stars, immediately aligned himself with Bron's message. Reed has been incredibly vocal about how frustrating it is to work your entire career to get to WWE, to be an incredible performer who can do things that men his size shouldn't be able to do, and then get overlooked or underutilized because the company would rather push the same names they've been pushing for the last decade. Reed and Breakker formed an alliance based on their shared frustration, their similar aggressive styles, and their mutual belief that they need to take what they want rather than waiting for it to be given to them. And what they wanted was to prove that they're on the same level or above these so-called legends, who get all the spotlight and all the opportunities. Brock Lesnar, who has been on a tear since returning to WWE and has been destroying everyone put in front of him, heard about Bron Breakker's comments and apparently found them amusing at first. According to people backstage, Brock didn't take Breakker seriously as a threat because while Bron is impressive for someone his age and experience level, he's not Brock Lesnar. He doesn't have Brock's legitimate athletic credentials, his mixed martial arts background, his superhuman strength and explosiveness. Brock has conquered WWE multiple times. He's conquered UFC, he's main evented WrestleManias, and broken the Undertaker's streak and done things that most wrestlers can only dream about. So when some kid who's been on the main roster for less than a year starts talking about how he's better than Brock, Brock's initial reaction was to laugh it off and not dignify it with a response. But Bron Breakker wouldn't let it go. He kept cutting promos attacking Brock and calling him out. He started appearing in Brock's segments uninvited. He made it personal by bringing up Brock's age and suggesting that Brock is past his prime and clinging to his reputation rather than proving himself in the ring every single week like younger wrestlers have to do. And eventually, Brock had enough. He confronted Breakker backstage and told him in no uncertain terms that if Bron really wanted to test himself against Brock Lesnar, that could be arranged. But Bron needed to understand that there's a difference between talking tough and actually being tough, and that getting in the ring with Brock Lesnar is a completely different experience than anything Bron has encountered so far in his career. Drew McIntyre got involved in this situation somewhat reluctantly. Drew and Brock have had their differences in the past, They've feuded and had incredible matches against each other, but there's a mutual respect between them as two legitimate badasses who have proven themselves at the highest level. When Brock started having issues with Bron Breakker and Bronson Reed, Drew initially stayed out of it because it wasn't his fight, but then Reed made the mistake of targeting Drew during one of Drew's matches, interfering and costing Drew a victory and an opportunity at a championship. Reed's justification was that Drew represents the same problem as Brock, that he's one of these established stars who gets opportunity after opportunity, while younger guys have to scratch and claw for every bit of recognition. Drew, who actually worked incredibly hard to rebuild his career after being released from WWE years ago, who spent time on the independent circuit and in other promotions proving himself before getting a second chance, took major offense to being lumped in with people who supposedly have things handed to them. So you had these two distinct conflicts running parallel to each other, Brock versus Bron, Drew versus Reed, and it was only a matter of time before those conflicts merged into something bigger and more dangerous. The catalyst came 2 weeks ago when Bron Breakker and Bronson Reed teamed up to attack Brock Lesnar during an interview segment. 2-1, they managed to get the better of Brock temporarily, hitting him with their finishing moves and leaving him laid out, while they stood over him and talked about how the beast isn't so scary when he's actually challenged by people who aren't afraid of him. That attack was humiliating for Brock, not just because he got beaten down, but because it happened on camera in front of the whole world. And if you know anything about Brock Lesnar's psychology and his character, you know that being embarrassed or made to look weak is something he absolutely cannot tolerate. Drew McIntyre saw that attack and immediately knew that Brock was going to want revenge in a major way. And Drew also knew that Bron and Reed weren't going to stop with just Brock. If they were successful in taking out Brock Lesnar, they'd come after every other top star on the roster to prove their point that the old guard needs to be eliminated. So Drew did something that surprised a lot of people. He approached Brock and proposed an alliance. Not a permanent partnership or a tag team, but a temporary agreement that they would work together to deal with the Breakker and Reed problem. And once that problem was handled, they could go back to their own separate paths. Brock, who normally operates alone and doesn't need or want help from anyone, agreed because he recognized that Breakker and Reed, working as a unit, gave them an advantage that would be difficult to overcome without some level of strategy and cooperation. This brings us to last night's episode of Smackdown, which will probably go down as one of the most talked about episodes in recent memory. The show started normally enough with various segments and matches happening as scheduled. Brock Lesnar and Drew McIntyre were both advertised to appear, but in separate segments, with no indication that anything unusual was going to happen. Bron Breakker had a match scheduled against a mid-card opponent, and Bronson Reed was supposed to cut a promo about his dominance and his mission to clear out the dead weight from WWE's roster. Everything seemed routine, but according to sources backstage, Brock and Drew had been planning something all day, and they had specifically requested that production keep cameras ready in the backstage area, because something was going to happen that needed to be captured. About halfway through the show, Bronson Reed finished his promo in the ring and started walking back through the curtain to the backstage area. The cameras followed him as he made his way through the gorilla position and into the main backstage corridor. Reed was talking to someone on his phone, not really paying attention to his surroundings, when suddenly Brock Lesnar appeared from around a corner and just tackled Reed with the force of a freight train. Reed, who weighs close to 300 pounds himself, was lifted completely off his feet and driven backwards into a concrete wall with such impact that you could hear it echo through the hallway. Brock immediately started throwing knees and punches. Not the theatrical wrestling strikes you usually see, but legitimate shots designed to hurt. Reed tried to cover up and defend himself, but Brock was relentless. Years of pent-up aggression and anger from being disrespected by these younger guys all coming out at once. Within seconds, Bron Breakker came running from the locker room area, having heard the commotion or possibly been alerted by someone who saw what was happening. Bron launched himself at Brock, and the two of them crashed into a stack of equipment cases in a tangle of limbs. This gave Reed a chance to recover and get back to his feet, and suddenly it was 2-on-1 again. Breakker and Reed both attacking Brock with everything they had. They were landing heavy shots. Reed with these devastating forearms and Breakker with suplexes and throws that would end most people's nights. Brock was fighting back, but the numbers game was starting to overwhelm him. And just when it looked like Breakker and Reed were going to put Brock down for good, Drew McIntyre appeared, and he had a steel chair in his hands. Drew didn't hesitate. He swung that chair and caught Bronson Reed right across the back with a shot that made everyone watching at home wince. Reed arched his back in pain and stumbled forward, and Drew hit him again and again, each shot echoing through the backstage area like a gunshot. Bron Breakker turned his attention from Brock to Drew, and the two of them started exchanging strikes. Breakker's power and explosiveness against Drew's size and technical skill. Meanwhile, Brock had recovered enough to grab Bronson Reed and deliver a massive German suplex on the concrete floor, Reed's body bouncing sickeningly off the ground. The sound of flesh hitting concrete is something you don't forget, and it's very different from the sound of someone landing on a wrestling ring canvas. This was real impact, real damage. The fight spilled into the catering area, which is always a chaotic setting for backstage brawls, because there's so much stuff that can be used as weapons or that can be destroyed in the process. Tables were overturned. Food and drinks went flying everywhere. At one point, Brock lifted Bronson Reed and threw him through one of the big catering tables, Reed's body crashing through the table and collapsing it completely. Drew and Bron Breakker fought their way toward the production area, where all the monitors and equipment for running the show are located. Breakker managed to get Drew in a power slam position and drove him through a table covered with production equipment, monitors and laptops and cables flying in all directions. The production crew was scrambling to get out of the way and protect whatever equipment they could save. Security finally arrived at this point, but what could they really do? You have 4 of the most physically dominant people in WWE, all of them legitimately pissed off and fighting with real intensity. And you expect regular security guards making $15 an hour to break that up. The first few security guards who tried to intervene got thrown aside like they were nothing. One guard tried to grab Brock from behind and got elbowed in the face, so hard that he went down immediately and had to be checked by medical staff. Another guard tried to step between Drew and Bron and ended up eating a claymore kick from Drew that sent him flying backwards into a wall. It became clear very quickly that security was not equipped to handle this situation. More people started coming from the locker room area. Wrestlers, producers, agents, anyone who thought they might be able to help calm things down or separate these 4 men. But here's the thing about backstage brawls like this. Nobody wants to be the person who gets hurt trying to break it up. Nobody wants to get caught by a stray elbow or get thrown into equipment because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. So a crowd formed, people watching and trying to figure out what to do, but not actually doing much of anything because the risk was too high. And meanwhile, Brock, Drew, Bron, and Reed continued destroying each other and everything around them. The fight moved again, this time toward the parking garage area. Brock had Bronson Reed in a Kimura lock, that brutal submission hold that Brock has used to break people's arms in both WWE and UFC. Reed was screaming in pain, and you could see him frantically trying to escape or reach something he could use to break the hold. Breakker came to Reed's rescue by picking up a trash can and absolutely smashing it over Brock's head, finally breaking the hold and giving Reed a chance to escape. Drew caught Breakker with a Glasgow kiss, a devastating headbutt that opened up a cut above Breakker's eye and sent blood streaming down his face. But Breakker just smiled through the blood, this unhinged look of someone who's enjoying the violence and the chaos. And he tackled Drew and they both went crashing into the side of a car in the parking area, setting off the car's alarm and denting the door. By this point, according to reports, local police had been called because the situation had gotten so out of control that Wee's own security and staff couldn't contain it. The fight had been going on for nearly 15 minutes of real time, which is an eternity for a backstage brawl. Normal segments like this last maybe 2 or 3 minutes before cutting to something else. But this just kept going and going. These 4 men absolutely determined to hurt each other and not stopping no matter who tried to intervene. The amount of damage to equipment, to the backstage area, to the arena itself was estimated to be in the tens of thousands of dollars. And that's not even counting the medical bills for the security guards and staff members who got caught in the crossfire. When police finally arrived, they had to physically separate these 4 men with the help of additional WWE security and some of the larger wrestlers from the locker room who were willing to risk getting involved. Brock Lesnar was still trying to get at Bron Breakker, even as he was being held back by 4 different people. Drew McIntyre was breathing heavily, covered in sweat and blood, looking like he'd just gone through a war. Bronson Reed was holding his arm, possibly injured from that Kimura lock that Brock had applied. And Bron Breakker had blood pouring down his face from the headbutt he'd taken. But he was still talking trash, still shouting threats about what he was going to do to Brock and Drew the next time he saw them. The level of genuine animosity and aggression on display was uncomfortable to watch because it felt so real and so personal. We made the decision to air most of this footage live on cutting between the backstage brawl and other scheduled segments, which was a bold and somewhat reckless choice from a production standpoint. They showed the initial attacks, the major spots like the suplexes on concrete and the people going through tables, the destruction of the production area, and the eventual breakup by police. What they didn't show, or at least edited out for the broadcast, were some of the more graphic moments, like the full extent of Breakker's cut and some of the strikes that looked too realistic and too brutal for television. But even with those edits, what aired was still incredibly intense and pushed the boundaries of what WWE typically allows on their programming. The reaction on social media was immediate and divided. One segment of the audience absolutely loved it and was praising WWE for finally delivering the kind of edgy, unpredictable, violent content that made the Attitude Era so popular. They were saying this is what wrestling should be, that it should feel dangerous and real, that having 4 legitimate tough guys fight backstage with no rules and no restrictions, is exactly the kind of thing that makes people want to watch. They were sharing clips, making memes, creating highlight videos, and generally treating this as one of the greatest moments in recent WWE history. The hashtags related to this brawl were trending worldwide, within minutes of it happening, but there was also a significant portion of the audience that was critical of what happened, and their concerns weren't without merit. They pointed out that this kind of violence, especially when it looks this realistic and involves weapons and concrete floors and people clearly getting hurt, sets a dangerous precedent. What happens when every wrestler on the roster starts thinking they need to have these ultra-violent backstage brawls to get attention or get over with the audience? What happens when someone gets seriously injured because they're doing this kind of stuff in an uncontrolled environment without the safety measures that exist in a wrestling ring? There were also concerns about the message this sends to younger viewers, that the way to solve conflicts is through extreme violence rather than through competition in a structured setting like a wrestling match. Wrestling journalists and podcasters have been debating non-stop about whether WWE went too far with this segment. Some are arguing that this was brilliant television that achieved exactly what it was supposed to achieve, making people talk and making the product feel unpredictable and must-see. Others are arguing that WWE is playing with fire, and that it's only a matter of time before something goes wrong in one of these backstage brawls and someone suffers a career-ending injury or worse. And there's also the question of whether this kind of content is sustainable. Can WWE do this every week without it becoming repetitive and losing its impact? Or was this meant to be a one-time thing, a special moment that stands out precisely because it's so different from their normal programming? Asterisk, from a storyline perspective, this brawl has elevated the rivalry between these four men to a level where there's really only one way to resolve it, and that's with some kind of massive multi-person match at an upcoming pay-per-view. The speculation is already running rampant about what kind of match it might be. A tag team match between Brock and Drew versus Bron and Reed. A fatal four-way where everyone's out for themselves. Some kind of no disqualification or extreme rules match that allows for the chaos and violence to continue in a more controlled setting. Whatever WWE decides to do, they've created a situation where the expectations are incredibly high because of how intense this backstage brawl was. The match is going to have to deliver on that same level of intensity and brutality, or it's going to feel like a disappointment. Asterisk, there's also the question of what this means for these four individuals going forward. Brock Lesnar has once again proven that even at his age, even after all the years, and all the matches, and all the punishment his body has taken, he's still one of the most dangerous and dominant forces in professional wrestling. The way he manhandled Bronson Reed, a man who weighs nearly 300 pounds, like he was nothing, reminded everyone why Brock is called the Beast. Drew McIntyre showed that he can hang with anyone when it comes to a fight, that his reputation as a tough guy isn't just talk but backed up by his willingness to get in there and trade shots with anyone, regardless of size or reputation. The Claymore kick he delivered to that security guard was stiff enough that people are genuinely concerned about whether the guard is okay. Asterisk, Braun Breaker and Bronson Reed, despite taking a beating and ultimately being on the losing end of this brawl once Drew got involved, actually came out of this looking incredibly strong. They proved they can hang with main event level talent like Brock and Drew. They showed that they're not afraid of anyone and that they're willing to fight anytime, anywhere, under any circumstances. The visual of Braun Breaker smiling through the blood running down his face, looking absolutely unhinged and loving every second of the chaos. That's the kind of image that creates stars. People are going to remember that. People are going to talk about how crazy and how fearless Breaker looked in that moment, and Reed's willingness to keep fighting even after taking those devastating German suplexes on concrete shows a level of toughness that's going to earn him respect from fans who appreciate that old mentality. Asterisk, the damage to the backstage area is significant enough that WWE reportedly had to bring in additional crews to repair and clean up before they could run another show in that arena. Equipment that was destroyed during the brawl has to be replaced. The car that got dented is apparently a rental that now needs repairs. There are legitimate costs associated with allowing this kind of chaos to happen, and WWE had to make a calculated decision that the value of the footage and the buzz it would generate was worth those costs. From a business perspective, it seems like that calculation was correct because the segment has been viewed millions of times across various platforms. It's been covered by mainstream media outlets, and it's generated more conversation about WWE than anything else they've done in recent weeks. Asterisk, but there are also reports that not everyone within WWE was happy about how things went down. Some producers and agents were apparently concerned that things got too out of control, that there were moments during the brawl where people could have been seriously hurt, and that allowing this kind of thing sets a precedent where wrestlers might feel empowered to go off script and do whatever they want if they think it'll get them attention. There's always been a tension in WWE between wanting to create moments that feel spontaneous and real versus maintaining control over the product and ensuring that everything that happens has been approved and fits into the larger plans. This backstage brawl tested those boundaries in a significant way. What really strikes me about this entire situation is how it represents a philosophical shift in how WWE approaches their content. For years, especially during the PG era, WWE was very careful about the level of violence they showed, about making sure everything looked theatrical and choreographed rather than realistic and brutal. They wanted to create a product that was family-friendly and advertiser-friendly, which meant toning down the edge and the intensity that had characterized wrestling during its previous boom periods. But in recent years, especially under Triple H's creative leadership, there's been a clear shift back toward content that's more mature, more intense, more willing to push boundaries and make people uncomfortable. This backstage brawl is the logical extension of that philosophy. It's WWE saying that they're willing to go there, to show you violence that looks and feels real, to create moments that make you question whether what you're watching is a work or a shoot. The question is whether this is the direction that WWE should be going in. Is more violence and more realism always better? Or is there value in maintaining some level of theatrical distance between the audience and what's happening on screen? Acknowledging that this is a performance and entertainment rather than actual fighting. I don't have a definitive answer to that question, and I think reasonable people can disagree about where the line should be. What I do know is that the backstage brawl between Brock, Drew, Bron, and Reed has created a conversation that extends beyond just wrestling fans. People who don't normally watch WWE are talking about it. Mainstream media outlets have covered it. And that level of cultural penetration is increasingly rare for wrestling in today's fragmented media landscape. Looking at the immediate future, Smackdown next week is going to be absolutely crucial for how this storyline develops. Will there be consequences for what happened? Will Nick Aldis or some other authority figure announce punishments or stipulations? Will these four men be kept apart, or will WWE lean into the chaos and allow them to continue their war? The anticipation and uncertainty about what happens next is part of what makes this compelling television. When audiences don't know what to expect, when they feel like anything could happen, that's when they're most likely to tune in and stay engaged. And that's exactly the position WWE has put themselves in with this storyline. I want to hear from every single person watching this video about how you feel about what happened last night. Do you think this was the greatest backstage brawl in WWE history? Do you think it was too violent and too realistic? Do you want to see more content like this, or do you prefer the more traditional approach to wrestling storytelling? Are you Team Brock and Drew, or are you Team Bron and Reed? Drop your thoughts in the comments right now, because I'm genuinely curious about where the audience stands on this. Hit that like button if this breakdown gave you new insights or perspectives on what happened. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications because I'm going to be covering every development in this storyline as it continues to unfold. Share this video with every wrestling fan you know because this is the kind of moment that demands to be discussed and debated. The Braun Breaker and Bronson. Reed vs. Brock Lesnar and Drew McIntyre backstage brawl is going to be remembered as a defining moment in modern WWE. For better or worse, it represents a company that's willing to take risks, that's willing to push boundaries, and that's willing to give audiences something they haven't seen before. Whether that's admirable or reckless is something history will ultimately judge. But what's undeniable is that for 15 minutes last night, we created must-see television that had people on the edge of their seats. That generated massive buzz and conversation. And that reminded everyone why professional wrestling at its best is unlike anything else in entertainment. The violence was shocking. The intensity was off the charts. The implications are enormous, and we're only at the beginning of what promises to be one of the most memorable storylines of the year. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video where we'll continue breaking down this insane situation and everything that comes next.